Welcome to Pharmacy View podcast, where we provide regular interviews with pharmacists and key people within Australian pharmacy and the associated global industry. In this stream of podcast episodes, we discuss with our guests the full scope of leadership tools that go into building the pharmacy leader's toolbox for team and career success. I am your host, Chantelle Turner, pharmacist, leadership coach, and founder of Turn Pharmacy Leadership. My guest today is proudly brought to you by Shopfront Solutions for all your shelf and digital marketing needs, part of the Arion Technologies Group.
Hello everyone, today I am super privileged to introduce to you someone who I consider a friend and a kindred spirit when it comes to emotional intelligence and self-awareness and these skills that lie one remove from being a pharmacist but allow us to be the best version of ourselves both in and outside of work and allow our clinical skills to shine. Our guest, she is a lecturer in the School of Medicine and Psychology at ANU. She's a hospital pharmacist. She has recently completed her PhD, specifically in burnout within Pharmacist, which I'm sure we'll cover a bit today. And she is with us. So her name is Karlee Johnston. So welcome so much, Karlee. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you, Chantelle. It's so great to be here. It's really nice to be able to talk to you and have other people hear what is usually our very private conversations a lot more publicly.
100%. And this is what I am super excited about, that people are going to be able to have a listen into what has been our breakfast conversations, what's been our conversation in an airport, and, going about our daily lives as well. So I'm super pumped to unpack it all here today. So to begin with, who is Karlee Johnston and what do we need to know about your pharmacy story?
I guess Karlee Johnston now is very, very different to Karlee Johnston even 5 years ago, but definitely 10 years ago. I'm very ambitious and very focused, end game kind of focused individual. And I have approached my career in that way. So I spent most of my hospital career, so I've been a hospital pharmacist since I finished pharmacy school. And I have really focused on becoming a critical care pharmacist. So I've done that and I got advanced practice. And so that's sort of that ambition or that very end focused sort of part of me was a very big part of my, I guess my career, what I thought was career success. What success looks like to me now is very different to what it looks like to me even 5 years ago, I guess. I have had burnout probably a couple of times, but certainly once that I guess was the catalyst to a lot of change for me in my life and certainly in my professional life. That sort of, I guess in the end, ended up with me taking a big chunk of leave. So I took some long service leave. And that was a period of time where I really was very privileged. I've been in a public service hospital job for that whole time, for my whole career, and so I was very lucky that I had long service leave. I know a lot of pharmacists don't get those kind of opportunities, so to have the privilege to have a break away from work is something that not a lot of people get. So I certainly acknowledge that was a very lucky time, and for me it meant the difference between being able to go back to pharmacy and not be able to go back at all. So I took some time off and realised that I had burnout. And when I started talking to colleagues about my experience, I found out that it wasn't just me, that quite a few of my colleagues had felt or were feeling really similar to the way I was. And so I decided to research it. And that, I guess, was the beginning of me moving into an academic position. I got a job where I got to do my research in the medical school at ANU, and I also got to teach pharmacology, so just luckily for me, they needed a pharmacology lecturer at the same time. So that was, again, very lucky. A lot of things, I really believe, a lot of things in our lives are put in front of us for different reasons, and I thoroughly feel like that was meant to change my life at that time, at that moment. And so I started my PhD in burnout, and that process One, I got to meet a lot of wonderful people, yourself included, through that process. But I got to interview a lot of pharmacists about their experiences working, particularly during COVID. And I realized really quickly that the pride I had in the way that pharmacists represent their communities was very, very deep. And that appreciation for that, the privileged role we have in people's lives has become more and more a part of what success looks and feels like to me. And so my main, I guess, interest now is really talking about, teaching, modeling how to be the best version of ourselves so that we can be the best pharmacists that we can be.
What a legacy to leave.
We'll see.
And well, a legacy to be working on as well, because, you know, I think that just as a side road of legacy, you know, we think about it as, you know, in retrospect, but our daily actions are what are creating our legacy as well. So what a noble way and a noble, I guess, as you said, privilege to be able to research this and give back and assist other pharmacists to continue our profession in a way that's going to be sustainable well and truly into the future.
Absolutely.
So let's start at the beginning. Burnout. How did it present for you, and what do you see in others?
It presented insidiously. I think it really crept up on me. I knew I was stressed, and I had spent a reasonable chunk of time not enjoying what I did, which was quite unusual in retrospect. When I look back, I enjoyed my job very, very much, love being a pharmacist. And so I knew that wasn't great, but I also sort of felt like there was no choice in it, or that it didn't matter. I had to keep going anyway. So it wasn't this sort of obvious thing where I went, oh my goodness, I'm really burnt out. It was, I sat in the car park before I went into work and I cried most mornings before going in, just to almost get it out before I got in there, because I felt like the day was going to bring that kind of emotion to it anyway. And so I felt myself very emotionally drained. I found myself as you know, most of my work is in ICU, and I found myself almost on two ends of the spectrum, almost where some patients I just couldn't connect with, and my empathy wasn't there for some of those stories. And on the other hand, I felt this deep, empathetic, almost sympathetic connection with other patients that had me really feeling their sadness, that was heavier than it sort of had been for me previously. And I guess I was feeling very, I still don't really know what word to use, but taken advantage of, or sort of uncared for in my job. So I felt like I was really resentful of sort of all the work that I was being asked to do, and nobody was helping me. And I had this really sort of this sense that I was kind of at it alone. What do I see in others? I see a very similar thing happen in others. So I think one of the key things for me that I've learned about burnout, both from interviewing pharmacists and just my own experience, is that pharmacists feel I feel emotional talking about it, an immense sense of duty. So we feel this overwhelming sense to be there for others. And that's patients, absolutely, but it's also peers. I see a lot of people saying, if I don't do this, then I'm leaving it on the rest of my team. So we've got this sense of responsibility or duty. I was asking my husband the other day, what word do I use to describe this thing that I've seen and felt and heard? But it's this heavy sense of having to show up. Mm-hmm. And even just thinking about it now, I think that's a really, really strong thing that comes through from most pharmacists. All of the pharmacists that I spoke to through my research, that's one really strong like thread, is that people feel a sense of responsibility and duty to their patients, to their teams, to their communities. And it is heavy. It's a heavy weight to carry sort of all the time.
Yeah. And to add my personal feelings of when I went through burnout as well. I totally get what you mentioned about that heavy feeling and that sense of duty. It was almost like, I used to describe it as, I would stand at the computer and it would just feel like I just had my head above the water. Like I was just constantly drowning, and it was all I could do just to keep the head above water. And so the way I went about that was investing more in others, and to be able to say, oh, well, if I can just keep the team going, that's going to make it easier for me. And then no one will notice. And it almost is like deflecting as well. And I get what you're saying about those opposite ends of the spectrum, that it is such an emotional roller coaster. So there's this total disconnect in so many ways, and then this truly sense of overwhelm at the other end of the spectrum. And for me, I was going through the roller coaster, but on the outside, it was this mask, like no one would have known until it was at breaking point.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sense that if I can just keep it together for the rest of the team, it'll be okay. Everybody else will be fine, and I'll be okay because everybody else will be okay. And so it's this sense of denial of sort of this, if I can be okay for everybody else, then that will make me okay. Because we often do that. We often get a sense of pride and feeling good about being there for other people. And I think when you're in that kind of space, you're really looking for those connections. You're really seeking out, how can this work better? How can I be better? And I think it's an easy way to ignore or to push aside the reality of what's really happening.
Yeah, 100%. And I don't know whether you see it in others as well, but I think for me, when I got to that point as well, and as you said, that if the team's okay, I'm okay, it is that you can't get that validation from within yourself, so you start looking for it elsewhere, and that is a very, very slippery slope to go down.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's almost nothing that anyone can do that will meet that standard that you're looking for. It's an impossible thing to be searching for, because it's never going to come in a way that will actually end up fixing you or making you feel better, because it can't come from outside. It's just impossible. It just doesn't work like that. Sadly.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm glad that we've both realise this now, and we are now both helping to provide others with the tools so they don't need to necessarily go down to the depths that we had to get to before coming out the other side. Before we get there, though, I want to just see whether we can join the dots between this need for external validation and the fact that it's never going to come, and the fact that you felt unsupported and taken advantage of in your workplace.
So I think a couple of things. I think the whole point of seeking external validation is to be seen, or to feel seen. When you're feeling unseen and unvalued, there's almost nothing anybody else can do to help you feel as seen as you feel like you need to be for that to be okay. It's such a hard thing to kind of really put into words, isn't it? Just trying to articulate that's really difficult, actually. One thing I think that I have learnt only after having been in that situation is when I've sort of looked back and talked to other people about it. There's been this sort of overall, what was it? So when I think to myself, what would it have taken for me to have been okay? Like, what was I looking for? I still don't know that there's an actual answer to that. I don't think there's anything that anybody could have done. And more importantly, the one question that I think I now know the answer to was, what did I ask for that wasn't given to me? And I realize now I didn't ask for anything. So I was very, very sad. I was very, very angry. I felt really taken advantage of. But I realize now that I did not ask for help. I did not ask for staff. I did not ask for time off. I didn't think I could. There were times where I didn't know what I needed, and I think that's a really important thing that we don't necessarily talk about very much, but actually knowing what you need is hard. It's actually a really hard thing to really understand your needs, especially when you're really hurting. And to ask for something is even harder. And so I realize now, many, many years later, many, many, many hours of self-reflection, and going over that time to really, for these moments, to really try and help other people and really try to describe what these things were. But I realize now, not once, not for 1 second, not at home, not at work, nowhere did I ask for anything.
What a realization. And it really aligns with what I have noticed, and also like within myself, but then in others, and why I personally really embarked on the emotionally intelligent leadership journey is that it's leadership of self, and that ability to be able to advocate for ourselves in a way that is authentic to us, so that we can, you know, protect our boundaries, and also be heard in a way that people understand as well. So I want to know, once you realize this, what was the process, or how did you go about trending towards, let's call it the new Karlee, or the Karlee 2.0, that evolved after your experience?
So I think there's a couple of things. I think the first thing is to take some time when I'm not feeling overwhelmed to really understand what my needs are. So I often talk about being at my best, and I talk to other people about what does it look like when you're at your best. So what are the things that really, what are the resources you need? What is the environment that you need? And a lot of that, as sort of tokenistic as it sounds, but a lot of that is just being mindful, just really knowing how you feel in different situations and really understanding, why do I feel like it? What has triggered this response in me? And, you know, you and I have talked about this many times, but I am a very big believer in naming my emotions. So whatever emotion it is, just so that I can kind of uncouple the cognition from it, like what is really going on here for me. I'm very, very emotional. A lot of my you know, I wear my heart on my sleeve. With me, what you see is what you get. And so really understanding how I feel in certain moments and what emotions are being evoked from in different environments is really important to me. So I'm fairly deliberate in moments where I'm feeling really happy. I'll put a little flag up in my brain and say, oh, I'm feeling really good right now. What is it? Like right now, when I'm sitting here talking to you about this stuff, I feel great. I think, okay, well, this is because it's something I really deeply care about. My values are being recognized here. I'm feeling like I can help other people, all those things. So I'm a lot more deliberate about how I'm feeling in different situations. Mm-hmm. And so then I know when I'm not okay, one, what might it take to make me feel a bit better, just for me? But two, if I'm at work and, you know, I really like, so for example, I really like working with others. I like being in a team environment. So I know when I've got to do a lot of individual work that I feel really overwhelmed with, and then I get angry that I'm the only one doing it. And I'm a lot more honest and authentic about what I need. And so I'll say to my colleagues or to my boss, look, I actually find this really tricky when I'm doing this work on my own. Does anybody want to get together and do some of this together? Can I ask for an extra person to help me with this for 3 days or whatever? And one thing which, you know, again, you and I talked a lot about, but one thing that I'm very, very passionate about is bringing my authentic self. And so when I ask because it's genuinely what I need. And if he can't give it to me, or whoever I'm with, talking about my boss right in this moment, but if whoever I need can't give it to me, then that's okay, because I've gone in, I've asked authentically, And that's the best that I can do to support myself in that moment. So I think knowing what I need, or kind of trying to understand a bit more what I need, being more mindful about how I feel in certain situations so I know what brings me joy, and being authentic and asking, just flat out asking directly. Brene Brown says clear is kind, and I believe that 100 times. I think if I'm clear with what I need and my expectations are explicit, then there's no confusion and I can't be frustrated by what I don't get, because I've at least asked for what I need.
Yeah, 100%. So I'm hearing lots of greater self-awareness and intentional self-awareness as well. I'm curious, being able to ask for what you want authentically, and as you said, clear as kind, I'm sure we would all agree that that is the gold standard, and that's what we'd all love to do every time. What tools did you use, or what, I guess, techniques did you help to strengthen that muscle to be able to ask for what you need?
So I do a lot of this practicing at home. So I teach this to my children too, and I have these conversations with my husband, and he always rolls his eyes and says, "Like, here we go, you're asking, you're being very deliberate about what you're asking from me," because it does take practice. It is not something that we're comfortable doing. Most of this stuff isn't easy. If it was, we wouldn't have to talk about it so much. We'd just all be out there just kicking goals all over town constantly. But it's just not like that. And so I find a lot of practice. I do a lot of conversations with other people about how to do this. And I find that doing that really helps to strengthen that muscle too, because just the practice, the role playing, I do a lot of sort of, okay, how might you go in and ask that, and how might that be received? And I think one thing I think that is really important is so a lot of times when we're not getting what we need, we assume that there's a deliberate defense on the other end. So we assume that my boss doesn't want to give me this time off for they don't like me, or some crazy narrative we've got going on in our own heads about, not being worthy or not working hard enough, or something that you think this other person is thinking, feeling, doing, or acting on. And a lot of the time it's just not. And so one thing I think that's really a really great way, I guess, to kind of approach those sort of conversations is with curiosity, with genuine curiosity. I can't understand why this person wouldn't be letting me take my leave when I want them to. I know it's just making up a scenario, but to go in and say, look, I really want to have that time off. I need to understand why I couldn't have that time off, and here are the reasons why I need it. 1, 2, 3. Can we have a conversation about that? Is that something we can do? And I think if you can be kind and curious and authentic, I think as a general rule, people find it really hard, 1, to say no to you, and 2, to be mean to you.
Yeah.
The opportunities I've had have been really positive. And I go in like that, the conversations are different.
I couldn't agree more. And bringing this back to, I guess, emotional intelligence as well, when we look at the competency of authenticity, it's not just about I am who I am, so I'm allowed to say whatever I want. It is about being able to communicate in a way that honors your needs, your beliefs, your values, but in a way that it can be heard. So articulating it to the right person at the right time in the right way. So by being able to do that practice at home, to be able to prepare and have a bit of a think about the situation before going in, we actually allow a much more open conversation as opposed to coming in on the defensive.
Absolutely.
And then that is setting up for what you want back in return. So if you go in being confrontational, you're going to get confrontation back. But if you go in open, you're setting it up for a much more positive experience for everyone as well.
And you've just hit on something that's really important that I haven't said, or maybe I've implied, but I definitely haven't said. But I have I'm very trigger happy. So if my values are very strong, and so if someone's questioning or something's mismatched for me, I get very irritated. I get like I'm like a bit of a dog with a bone. What I have learned over time is that going in like that never gets me anywhere. And so now I very rarely react in the moment. I'm much better, even though it is a lot of work for me, and I deliberately have to tell myself, do not react to this. You can feel how you feel, but do not react to it. And you can think about this later and work out how you're going to react later. And that's advice I give to a lot of people now, that giving yourself some time and space will change not just the way you react, but the message and how it's heard. I'll give you an example. Quite a few years ago now, but I had a boss who we just didn't really mesh. Lovely person, but just work-wise. And I used to go in very frustrated into the office, really frustrated, very defensive about decisions that were being made about my team. A lot of the time I would cry, because when I'm angry or frustrated or sad or happy, I cry, just a crier. And my mentor, I could not get anywhere with this person. And I was talking to my mentor about it, and she said to me, I think you're losing your message because of the way you're going into the room. And I was like, well, that's crazy. She's like, sure, you may think that's crazy. And she said, how about you maybe try and think about what is your message? What's your main message? What do you want to get out of the conversation? Make a time, instead of just barging into the office where this person is then going to be very defensive, that you've caught them off guard, no time for preparation, and you might see a change in how that conversation goes. And 100%, she was absolutely right. And that, I still remember that. There's a lot of just little lessons in my life that I remember very clearly. That is one. And so now I'm not perfect at it. I won't say I am. I'm definitely not. But one thing that I try really hard to do is to control my behavior when I'm reacting. Not my emotion. My emotion is what it is, and I let that be, because I can't. If I push that down, it doesn't feel good for me. I'm not a push down my emotions kind of gal. But what I do is I've got like a little imaginary backpack where I put that, whatever's happening for me, I'm like, okay, this emotion, I'm angry or I'm sad or I'm frustrated or whatever. I know that's how I'm feeling. I know what's happening right now. Don't react. Put that in my backpack. And then when I get somewhere where I'm safe and happy and calm, I'll pull that back out again and try and work out what's going on for me. And then I'll have a conversation with the person who made me feel that way, if that's the thing that I want to do with it. Sometimes it isn't. And sometimes I just think, thank goodness I did not react to that, because that is not a conversation I actually really want to have at all.
Yeah, amazing. That is such good advice and such a brilliant tool to be able to take throughout your day. As pharmacists, regardless of where we're working, we work in reactive environments, and I think that does suck us down into becoming really reactive, and that impacts our ability to respond appropriately, meaningfully, in an emotionally intelligent way.
Yeah. And in a way that you can be proud of later. That's really important to me. I say that to the kids too, your behavior, you need to be proud of that. And if you react, at times you'll behave in a way that you wouldn't have normally behaved, and then you're going to feel yucky about that later, and that's not nice. You don't want to have to add that to yourself.
Yeah, 100%. And my emotional intelligence brain is wanting to spiral down the rabbit hole of the science of that, but we're going to park that. And I want to expand on this a little bit further and say, how does that ability to be able to put that in your emotional backpack to unpack whenever you so choose, how does that influence the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and how you continue on?
That varies. It varies depending on how strong I am on any given day, week, month, whatever. Generally speaking, it means that I can not let it derail my entire day. Sometimes it still does, don't get me wrong. Like I said before, I'm definitely not perfect at this. But it also means it can be it can be burdensome. I won't lie. Like if I've had a big day and I've popped a few of those moments into my backpack, and I get home, I can feel tired from it. It's actually a really tiring thing to be emotionally burdened. And sometimes I don't want to deal with it even when I'm at home. And so I sometimes won't. Sometimes I'll say, okay, well, it can stay in here until I'm much more ready. Once that bag starts to get full or heavy itself, that I can feel. So I'm like, okay, there's a lot of stuff in here that I haven't actually done anything with. Damn, I'm going to have to actually unpack you sooner rather than later, or that's going to end up being tricky. And so the way I do that is, well, it depends what it is, but a lot of the time now, and I kind of have been doing this since my burnout, is I write. So I journal. It's a pretty nonsensical kind of journal. Like I couldn't go back and read it and be like, oh, this day, this is what happened. It's very, it's just whatever I need it to be, actually. It doesn't even have to be, doesn't make any sense necessarily at all. But sometimes I'll just, write an angry note or draw a picture, or I don't know. I'm very flexible with how that sort of comes out of me. The other thing that I've recently had some conversations with some psychologists around some of this stuff, but the other thing that I don't do particularly well, as I think pharmacists do particularly well actually, is spend a lot of time on my own. And I don't mean on my own because I'm by myself a bit, as in, I can be home working without the kids, or I can be in my office working on my own, but I don't spend a lot of time with myself. And so, I was having a big whinge to one of the psychologists about how I tried to have a couple of weeks off and I was still really busy and nobody would leave me alone and and she said, yes, but you don't actually really want to spend that time, because that's the time where you have to kind of just be with yourself and just spend some time hanging out with Karlee. And maybe that's not something you're used to. I feel my life very busy, like most pharmacists are. And so one thing that she sort of talked with me about was maybe once I dropped the kids off to school, maybe driving to a coffee shop and sitting by myself for 30 minutes and just not on my phone, not doing work, not talking on the phone, but just some quiet time. So I've done that. This only happened to me 2 weeks ago, and I've done that 3 times in 2 weeks. And she also said, why don't you go for a walk at lunchtime, take your phone and just go for a half an hour walk or something. And I've done that a couple of times, and that has been a huge help to me because I've given myself a bit more space, because it's really easy to fill space up. And when you've got a lot of emotional stuff in your backpack, that the time it takes to really unpack some of that, we underestimate. And so allowing yourself that time, because a lot of people, a lot of mums and dads, like a lot of busy people, that time by yourself is, we never prioritize it, because we could be cooking dinner, or we could be ordering school books, or we could be at work, or we could be, studying, or whatever other thing. And I think there's a lot of guilt associated with doing nothing. And I think when we reframe that and say, actually, this is work, it's work for me, to sit and have a chat to myself, then I think just that reframing can be really helpful, and that has really helped. This is probably the emptiest my backpack has been for a very, very long time, the last couple of weeks, where sometimes I don't get right to the bottom of the pack. Sometimes I just leave a little couple of things in the bottom. This has been a really nice way to kind of work through that.
Again, that is such fantastic advice. And if we look at the definition, and you almost said it not too long ago, but emotional intelligence is the ability to identify, reason with, perceive, and influence emotions in ourselves and in others. And that's not a quick fix. That is not something that we can do in 5 seconds, and especially when it comes to ourselves as well. So prioritizing the space to be able to do that is such a wonderful gift that really should be a non-negotiable for us if we're going to show up as the best version of ourselves at home, at work, and everywhere in between.
in our lives.
Yeah. So we could talk for an eternity, but I am conscious of the time. So I want to know leadership of self. You've identified that success for you now is quite different to what it was 10 years ago and even 5 years ago. What role has leadership of self played in that?
It's everything. What I want for myself now is very, very different. In terms of when I was, I won't say younger, when I just, a few years ago, success was really about that external validation, being seen to be the best in whatever way that meant. And for me, it was in critical care pharmacy. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still important. I still do seek external validation. I'm not pretending like suddenly I'm just, think I'm great and it doesn't matter what anybody else says. I still do value the opinion of my peers, absolutely. But now it is more about my integrity. It's more about the way I show up and being proud of what I put out into the world. So it's not about what, but about how. And I'm a lot more deliberate with my actions to be in line with my values than I ever was before. And it's taken a long time. It's not an easy thing to do. And I don't always do that. I don't. Some days I show up and I go, crap, I've really acted in a way I'm not proud of today. So I'm not pretending like that's, it's perfect. It's certainly not. But the value that I place on that behavior is a lot higher than what it was before.
Yeah. And how has that affected or influenced, I guess, that roller coaster that you mentioned right at the start?
I think what it's done is I can see it. I can see it now, and I couldn't see it before. And there's a lot of power in being able to see and understand how you feel, a lot of power, and it influences your behavior. If you can see it and understand it, then you can't necessarily change it, but you can certainly influence it. And so that roller coaster for me still there, but I see it. I see the highs and I celebrate the highs, and I see the lows and I acknowledge where they are and where they fit. And so the feelings associated with those ups and downs don't necessarily have an overall influence or impact on my behavior, which feels like a really, it feels like I have control, a lot more control than I had before. And that feels powerful.
Yeah, amazing. So I've got two questions. The first one is, there might be some people listening to this podcast that go, you know what, emotions, asking for what I want, being able to be clear, to be kind, and, being more in control of my behavior is a bridge too far for me. I reckon I can get through by just fighting along the way.
Yep.
What have you got to say to those people?
I've got to say the fights will land on your side a lot more. You'll end up winning the fights way more if you take a little bit of time and space for yourself. It doesn't need a lot. It needs a little bit. You just need to acknowledge that the way you're feeling influences your behavior. If you can just do that, if you can go, okay, I'm angry and this is the way I'm reacting to that anger, it's an extremely powerful thing. And then the conversations you have will be better. You will end up on top more often. 100%. Trust me, I promise that will happen.
Yeah.
You'll get what you need more.
I'll stand on that hill with Karlee as well, preaching the same thing. And the last one I want to ask is, I am trying to build a leadership toolbox to be able to give to all of our listeners and all the pharmacists and pharmacy assistants, anyone who's working in our industry across the country. So if there was one tool that you could put into this leadership toolbox that everyone should have, what would it be?
The ability to ask for what you need. 100%. That is when you ask for what you need in a way that is heard, you almost always get it. People want to help you. They're not trying to push you down. They're trying to lift you up, even though sometimes it feels like they're not. And if you can ask for what you need in a way that can be heard, it's amazing.
I personally have got so much out of this conversation, and you have really identified some home truths that maybe I needed to go back to the drawing board on as well, because you're right, none of us are perfect, and this is hard stuff, and we all need reminders as well. That's where coaches and mentors, as you mentioned before, come in as well. So thank you so much for your time today and sharing it with our listeners. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we leave?
No, the only thing I will say, which you said, and I think you and I have always agreed on this, but it's a lot easier to do if you can get someone to help you to do it. Mentor, coach, peer, someone to talk to that can help you, that will give you feedback, honest feedback. Really, really, you can do it by yourself, but it's a lot harder. It's much easier if you've got someone in your corner.
Absolutely, and that sounds like another conversation for another day. So thank you very much, Karlee.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today on the Pharmacy View podcast. And don't forget to like, share, and leave us a comment if you found this episode of value or have feedback. Podcast episodes are promoted through social media, LinkedIn, YouTube, and major podcast mediums. And each episode can be found on the Pharmacy View webpage with links to guest contact and business details. If you're a pharmacist or industry support supplier who would like to join us on an episode, send us a message through LinkedIn or complete an inquiry form on the Pharmacy View webpage. I am your host, Chantelle Turner, pharmacist, leadership coach, and founder of Turn Pharmacy Leadership. And on behalf of Shopfront Solutions and Arion Technologies, thanks again for joining us today on the Pharmacy View podcast.